All throughout human history, the lines between what is considered magic and what is considered just a replicatable event in the universe have always been a little bit blurry. As we have figured out how reality works around us, which in and of itself is bizarre given that we are actually that reality, we have learned a lot of things originally thought to be just the works of witches and sorcerers, and it can actually be naturally explained. Again, favorite example, bring someone back from the Middle Ages and then show them how a TV works. To them, you just use a wand to open up a portal to another area. Gonna have to fight to not be burned at the stake on that one, but this brings us around to today's concept. As what is basically Pennywise the Clown shows up to the party in a small town, an entire class would go missing except for one boy. Pretty much on brand for Pennywise. As the teacher would be blamed, a man would attempt to track down why his son went missing, and what is going on to cause this is fairly strange. But what exactly could explain what is happening with this form of mind control? Well, let's discuss that in today's episode, covering weapons. We kick off today's story with younglings yelling as it suddenly cuts out. One girl begins speaking ASMR style, which activated my almond to the 10th degree, about how people get got, and the town tried to cover it up, but clearly did a bad job, as everyone still knows. Plus, Loose Lips Sink Ships over here is telling us the whole story currently. You allegedly won't find it in the news, but you'll find it with this youngling telling you everything. Heading over to the elementary school, Blonde Ramen here goes to actually find that her entire class has only one youngling in it and everybody else is gone. Bit concerning, isn't it? He's the only one there because at 2:17 a.m. the other younglings walked outside and left their homes. Naruto running away into the darkness. The parents should count themselves lucky a weeb epidemic was going on. Also, two things. First, I'm preferencing this, by the way. I don't always get sick. That's the end of that statement. And second, if I sound weird, I currently have the flu, but my immune system is already absolutely stomping it to the track of reclaimed Earth super heavy fighting, so it's all good. Keep up the good fight, T cells and B cells, y'all got it. Actually, it's incredibly nerdy, I know, but I always looked at illness as like a mini war going on in your body, which means clearly on a cellular level, there has to be at least just one macrophage in there going absolutely ham on some of the viruses just by sheer probability. That guy is channeling the super heavy fighting. Anyhow, back to the movie. Obviously, the parents were upset about this event as the cops all get called. The cameras were inspected that just showed them heading out and not being coerced out by anyone. The one student who was there was questioned, as Blonde Ramen is as well. Eventually, the school had to open back up, but not before the parents were brought into a meeting, as we now get to go to that super fun time parent-teacher conference. The therapist is talking about how the parents may feel upset as one alpha chad then stands up, pointing at Blonde Ramen, asking what exactly she was doing in her class. Probably showing them anime or something because, again, Naruto running out. So she gives a politician speech, which naturally calms everyone right down. She wants answers herself, and she's sorry. The parents aren't buying it, though, as they say she needs to be locked up. The principal then steps in as he calms everyone down and then tells her to go home. Deciding instead to go to the liquor store, real, some random then runs up asking for money. Heading to the cheap vodka, bro, Taka literally just liquefies your liver. I mean, I too was in college once, don't drink that crap. Grabbing 2 bottles for good measure, she then gets a phone call and someone tells her to watch her back because tonight's the night, as then they get hung up on. Heading back outside, a truck looms in the distance as Blonde Ramen heads home. Going inside, this is like a really nice house for a single teacher, much like the movie Together, which I covered, which you should totally go watch. How are these teachers affording these homes? The average teacher salary is like $63K. Hearing the doorbell ring, she then calls out, but nobody answers. Looking through, nobody is there as a quadruped begins barking next door. The door then gets banged on once again, grab the force multiplier. Instead, she heads out with a flashlight. Not exactly the first thing I would have gone for, since she finds Witch written on the side of her car. Going to scrub it the next day, yeah, pretty sure you're going to need more to get that out of the clear coat. Turns out Scrub Daddy won't cut it here, although Comet and Water actually may fix this issue. It's just grainy enough, but it will cause your clear coat to haze, so you'll have to polish that out later. Heading into the principal's office the next day, Blonde Ramen then asks to speak to the youngling that was in her class. She is denied access, as it's then brought up that she drove a student home prior, and it was inappropriate. I remember catching a ride home with my teacher when I was like 6. Miss Munson was a real one. Different times though, it's like 1998. Holy God, I'm getting old. Doing the normal thing, she ends up calling the cops about the paint on her car. She waits to another officer walking by as then she heads to the bar that evening. Meeting up with said officer, they then hug it out as she asks about his hand. Getting a drink, it's super awkward. He's glad that she texted as then he orders a Coke. So, Needham appears to go over about as well as a wet fart in church, but evidently that doesn't matter because he does decide to stay for one more drink. It is now the next morning as Blonde Ramen wakes him up, driving him to work. He says he has to go to work all day and is just being sort of dismissive. She hopes that's not the vibe over there as there are 17 missing younglings, which AO! Is that a 3rd Gen 4Runner? Absolutely goated vehicle. I have an unhealthy obsession with Toyota because clearly Toyota supremacy. Someone please prevent me from buying a 3rd-gen 4Runner. I do have an LX 450, which is the Land Cruiser variant of Lexus from 1997. She is a total, I don't know, I probably can cuss. It's a total shitbox. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm currently going for like the Overland build, which I know, overlanding is so overdone. But what can I say? Driving that gal in the backcountry would be pretty great. But I keep looking at 3rd-gens like a crackhead looks at spare change. I don't know. It calls to me. Anyways, realizing the drop-off didn't go well, Blonde Ramen then tells him to inhale a Richard, as then she drives off as she starts following a school bus. Now, this is going well. Very normal thing to do, I reckon. Continuing to follow the youngling from her class, she then sees the door open and then just straight up absorbs him. Heading to the house, the windows are covered in newspaper blocking any sunlight. Heading around back, she then finds a hole in the window, to which she then looks through and sees the whole place is darkened before spotting 2 people sitting there motionless. Going back to the car, she then calls the principal, as she's told, to just leave him alone, and he's going to forget the call ever happened. Heading back to the liquor store, Cindy from accounting then grabs a bottle. She starts accusing Blonde Ramen of going heels to Jesus with him. Who's him? Well, context clues says the cop. She says she was told they weren't together, as then she heads home and drinks. As she does, she begins dreaming about being back at school. Heading into the classroom, all the younglings then have their heads down, which is horrifying. And looking back at the one student still there, he looks up as he displays a form of makeup on his face. Waking back up, who in their right mind sleeps with their door to their bedroom open? Okay. So as she lays down and sees someone in the ceiling, which scared the holy crap out of me, one must ask, how did she find her house? Perhaps information online? Well, that works out perfectly with our sponsor today. But first, this episode is sponsored by Incogni. Go to incogni.com/Roanoke and use code Roanoke for 60% off. Incogni helps wipe yourself from the internet completely. They can't harm you if they can't find you. Link below to claim your 60% off and get your personal data off the market. You know what's happening right now? Your internet data is being tracked and sold without your consent on any of it. In fact, thousands of companies are collecting, aggregating, and trading it without you even knowing. How exactly? Well, let's say you signed up for a newsletter with your email. A hack happens, and now you're just getting absolutely spammed. Or maybe you put your personal info into a website that has a leak. Well, now your personal data, like name, address, phone number, social security, and the other pieces of info that are floating around, are out there being sold. With Incogni, you can take back your personal data, and with their unlimited and family plans, you can now point to any People search site or other website where your personal information is visible, and one of their privacy agents will take care of the rest for you. No more leaks of your home address or employers finding out personal details from 2013. So, if you're ready to take back your personal data today, then go to incogni.com/Roanoke and use code Roanoke for 60% off. Alright, let's get back to it. Okay, real question though, do you sleep with your bedroom door open? Bro, I literally lock my door when I go to bed. It's like, I need that extra layer of wake up, someone is breaking in. I'm not getting caught slipping. And as always, if you break into my house, you're gonna have to fight a birthday suit Roanoke. Anyways, being a total weirdo the next day, she then follows the youngling once more, saying she just wants to say, hey, gal, you are not helping your case here in any capacity. She then follows up with, mainly because she's been thinking about him a lot, seriously, not helping your case. The youngling then tells her to stop following him, and then she heads over to his house and bangs the door. Doing a stakeout that night, she pours special sauce into her drink, as night then falls and the door opens. A woman comes out brandishing a knife of sorts as she climbs into the car before cutting off some of Blonde Ramen's hair. Alright, so scissors, as we all know, are basically just 2 knives in one. We now jump over to Archer, absolutely Chad-like name. As he sleeps in his son's bed, his wife comes in to tell him that she's going to work, and replaying the footage of that night, his son that ran out, he then heads outside and leaves to go to work as well. Getting to the house that's under construction that I'm assuming he's the project manager of, he has made a few mistakes as he's a little distracted, expected given the circumstances, and freaking out about the door paint, he then goes and buys more before stopping by the station to get information. He's given the runaround about how they are doing everything that they can, and you need to stop worrying. I don't know, man. I think everyone just expects cops and detectives to figure out what the issue is, but the reality is, a lot of stuff goes unsolved. Just throwing that out there. The chief disagrees that Blonde Ramen is somehow involved, and then back over to the PTO, Sterling leaves instead of following the mob that he created, as then he goes to the liquor store to tail Blonde Ramen. Watching her from afar, he has the paint as then he paints Witch on her car. Going home, he starts astral projecting out of his meat suit that night. Allegedly, this is confirmed in CIA declassified documents as a potential ability of humans. Now, did the CIA just make this up to screw with other countries? It's definitely possible. It's just odd that they were able to actually correctly map old Soviet facilities that were later confirmed to be correct. Because then, what would be the point of lying about it? Maybe for future endeavors. I don't know. Looking down on himself, he then follows his son into the woods and towards his own house once again. He went too far away from his body, though. You can only get like 400 feet of distance, as then he looks up and sees a force multiplier in the sky with 217 written on it. Heading back upstairs, he then heads to the back rooms where he finds his son under the product placement Batman sheets. As he asks where he is and where he went, his son doesn't answer him as in the light flashes. Oh God, what is that? The next morning, Sterling then wakes up freaked out as he spots a tower in the distance and beyond. Pulling out a map, he begins drawing lines to determine where his son could have gone. Heading over to another missing student's house, he has an awkward conversation as he asks to take a look at the footage as she says she's not comfortable showing him. Why? Don't know. Some people just really aren't comfortable at all with anything. So, waiting for Gare Bear to come home, he then talks to the dad about the footage, as then he agrees to show him as he maps out where the youngling specifically ran. Using a laser pointer, he then points to the next house as he now has 2 intersecting lines. Driving around town to understand what it means, he then spots Blonde Ramen as he gets out to talk to her, and it starts escalating, as one might expect. The principal then starts running over as Sterling tries to stop him, as it turns into a pretty good fight. We now jump over to Officer Doofy. His wife is calling him as she's going to be gone for the next 3 nights, but she will start dropping eggs on Friday so they can hook up. She then asks him to hit a meeting afterwards as he says he won't drink and then heads to the chief's office. Starting his shift, he then spots Blonde Ramen across the way as he's driving around doing whatever it is that cops do during the day, which I have no clue. Hang out stuff, I guess. I don't know. Spotting Grease Lightning running across the road, he's trying to break into a place as he gives chase. Going lights and sirens, he follows them to the back of some buildings before tackling them. Predictably, he comes up with some lies about working there, in an abandoned building, as then he brings him back to his car. Going to check his pockets, Officer Doofy then gets pricked by a needle, which is absolutely terrifying, and then punching Greasy Boy over here, he then goes and cleans out his wound. Alright, so what do you do in this situation? So there are 2 designations of medications for this: PrEP versus PEP. PrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis, and PEP is post-exposure prophylaxis. PrEP meaning taken before, and post meaning taken after. Essentially how these work is after you are exposed, if it's taken within 3 days or at least 72 hours, it can prevent a permanent infection from being established in the body. While some cells will become infected concerning like the cytoplasm by HIV naturally, this medication will prevent the virus from continuing to replicate within the body. As you take the medication, the cells that are infected will begin to naturally die off. Given the virus cannot replicate within the body, the infection is effectively prevented. Now you may be asking, well, Roanoke, if HIV integrates into the genome, then why is it that it doesn't transfer to the daughter cells? And this is why it's critical to take this within 3 days of a potential exposure event. PEP will actually block it before it integrates into your genome by blocking reverse transcriptase, which is actually how HIV becomes a part of your genome. Along with that, integrase strand transfer is also inhibited, which stops viral DNA from integrating as well. As HIV floats around within your cytoplasm, it isn't actually all that stable. As a result, it usually just is degraded relatively quickly, or the cell itself does not actually even attempt to replicate what was in the cytoplasm during mitosis. And so it's just really never inherited in the next line, known as daughter cells. And now you know. And knowledge is power. Turning off his cruiser camera, he then tells him that he will let him go, as they both did wrong. Heading to the chief's office, he tells him what had happened. In a month or so, as long as it's never reported, it will then be overwritten. Of course, if he goes and gets PEP, it could trigger an investigation into what actually happened. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say get on PEP. Getting a text from Blonde Ramen, Officer Doofy now heads to the bar from earlier, hugging it out, and then horizontally hugging later. He then heads to his 3rd-gen goated vehicle before heading home. Spotting his wife's purse on the counter, Cindy from accounting comes down, and she asks where he's been. Not knowing where he's been, she then gets upset as Officer Doofy then heads back to work. So basically life is falling apart for this dude here because of his own choices, and then spotting Grease Lightning from earlier, he then jumps in his cruiser and then goes to give chase, turning off his camera this time. Jumping over to Grease Lightning's perspective, Brother is addicted to that baking soda. Hanging out of his tent in the rain, he then walks through the town, checking car doors to see if they are open or not. Calling his sister, she then hangs up on him as he breaks into one car. Perfect example, lock your doors, as then he heads over to the pawn shop to pawn whatever this thing is. Seeing a 50K reward poster, he then haggles for the iPad, as the guy doesn't really want it. Trying to break into the store, he then comes to after being punched in the head. Walking through town, he looks for a place to break into to steal more stuff. Spotting his mark, it's the House of Wonders, no less. Breaking in through the upstairs window, immediate no. Got an episode of Horrors up in here, and then exiting the room, he begins grabbing a pillowcase to pilfer the house, as he finds one door in particular is locked. Heading downstairs, the house is pretty gross, and then he starts grabbing stuff before finding an old, I think it's an NES, as he spots the homeowners in the reflection of the TV. Seeing they are completely catatonic, he then waves in their faces, but they don't move. Realizing, not my problem, he then hears a banging noise as he starts jacking the silverware, and then hears noises in the basement. Heading down there, he then spots the younglings as they all turn to him, freaking him out, so he just, drops the loot and then runs. The parents stand back up as he goes to run out of there in the rain, as then they shut the door. Returning to the pawn shop, everything is then tallied up as Grease Lightning realizes he knows where the younglings are. knocking back some baking soda. He then calls in but says he doesn't like police stations, so can he just like meet somebody somewhere, as then he gets yelled at by Officer Doofy. Running to the woods, he escapes as then he spots the woman in the woods. Not ideal. Running back to his tent, he then closes it up. That has to have been bad baking soda. Actually, I think it's something else, but we'll kind of get there. So as he hears someone approaching his tent, grabbing his needles, Officer Doofy then opens the tent and gets some more needles in his face. Having a pellet dispenser pulled on him, he then tells Officer Doofy he knows where the younglings are, as then he gets put back into the cruiser, as he asks Grease Lightning if he has AIDS or not. Allegedly he does not, although I don't think this is like a reliable person to be like, oh hey, how's your physical health? Like, nah dude. So heading through the neighborhood, he's then shown where the younglings are, as Grease Lightning says he doesn't want to be rude, but how does he know he won't take the reward for himself? Well buddy, you just completely screwed yourself. Better to just shut up sometimes. Officer Doofy is then brought inside as we jump forward to that night, as then he's drug out and brought into the house. Jumping over to the principal, because he's your pal allegedly, he's at the store with his husband, as then he's in the middle of telling Blonde Ramen he will have to have a face-to-face conversation with the younglings' parents, as then we head over to the school, which now we see it is in fact the Forest Lady, or Pennywise.
I'm only 47. That's what you said when we met.
So as Pennywise then sits down and then talks to the principal, as she is informed that she's not the younglings' legal guardian, so, they need to see the parents. But she's like, oh, well, they have a touch of consumption, as the principal tells her, well, the offspring's welfare has been brought into question, so he has to make contact, otherwise he has to get the cops involved. Also, by the way, touch of consumption is tuberculosis. Throwing that out there. So back over at their house, they then watch a video over the cordyceps fungus, as Pennywise then shows up and tells the principal she's on the verge of collapse, as then she asks for some water as she enters the home. Oh god, kick her out. Putting her bag on the counter, then just starts coughing as she asks for a bowl. Being handed that bowl, she then kind of questions if they've already contacted the authorities yet, as she starts wrapping a stick in some thread. It is the ribbon of the principal. Cutting her hand, she then wipes the blood on it as she steals some of the husband's hair and then rings a bell. The principal freezes up as then she wraps the hair and snaps the twig. The principal then throws up something all over his husband, as then he starts headbutting him, caving in his face. Using Blonde Ramen's hair now, he runs off and goes after her. As Pennywise leaves, the principal begins his nice jaunt down the road, going after Blonde Ramen, who's arguing with Sterling at the gas station. The fight then ensues once again as Blonde Ramen runs through the store. Prior to the principal grabbing Blonde Ramen, Sterling then knocks him into the window as she gets to her car and takes off with the principal giving chase. Getting into his truck, he gives chase of the principal following him, as then he runs into the road and is annihilated by a car with his head completely done so. Over at the hospital, Blonde Ramen then waits for Sterling, whose wife actually never showed up to check on him. Ha, bit of a spirit breaker, I suppose. Blonde Ramen then thanks him for helping her, as Sterling says he's seen this before, the way that he was running. He says the principal looked like he was weaponized. Ah, he said it! Anyways, Blonde Ramen then interrupts Sterling by knowing what is up with the lines that intersect. Putting the last piece of the puzzle together, it's the house that the youngling has been at that she has been following, which is a really weird statement to say. Jumping over to the said youngling, he's a bit of a nerd, so life sucks. At that age, unless you catch up in height, the only way forward is to weightlift. Damn these Neanderthal genetics. As his old man then picks him up from school, he's informed Pennywise is coming to stay at their house. It's the mother's aunt, as the mom then says it's time to clean up in case a guest walks into your room and then, I don't know, white gloves the trim on top of the door to your closet. You know, like parents like, oh, make sure you clean your room and everything associated with it in case the guests go in there. I don't know. You know how parents are. Late that night, Pennywise has shown up, as the next morning the youngling's parents argue quietly about Pennywise being there. As the youngling then goes to brush his teeth, youngling just being his name officially, he looks in the room and then sees Pennywise staring at him. Getting driven to school, his dad thinks Pennywise won't be there any longer than a month because she's gonna drop. At school, Matthew then throws a pencil at the youngling, as the youngling then heads out to get picked up by his old man, but he doesn't show up. So begins the mini walks home. Heading inside, the home is decidedly darker. Finding his dad and mom sitting at the table, his dad asks him how school was as Pennywise comes in, talking to the youngling as his mom now asks how school was. Being weirded out by what's happening, he then splashes water on the face of his dad to get him to wake up, as then he's sent to bed without food. Dang, 4 p.m. bedtime, that's rough. As he is instructed the next morning by Pennywise to sit at the table, she then tells him not to worry about his parents. To show him the stakes, she then gets his parents to start stabbing themselves in the face with a fork. Sufficiently freaking out the youngling, she then informs him she can make his parents eat each other if she wants. Well, I wonder if that process is quicker on the draw than a 9mm round, actually. Interesting exercise, let's find out. Coming back home, youngling then finds Pennywise sitting with a plant, as he's informed he will need to feed his parents. So this process continues on for what appears to be a few weeks. Soup, walking, creepy great ants, standard Tuesday evening. One night, as he awakens to find Pennywise throwing up in a bowl, she says that she's very sick. She's too sick for water, and apparently the youngling's parents were supposed to make her feel better, but it isn't working. A hospital won't fix her, but you know what will? A 9mm round. So she says if she got better, she would go back home, but she needs something from each of Youngling's classmates. Scanning the room for what he could take, he sees their cubbies and decides that is the move. Leaving gym class, he then heads back to the classroom to acquire the materials, taking each of the pieces of paper from their boxes. Youngling is then confronted by Blonde Ramen as she asks if he's okay, as he's been quiet as of late. She tells him he can talk to her if he wants to, as then he says, well, I want to go. Now I guess that's talking. Heading home, he then heads upstairs to Pennywise's room and puts the slips underneath the door. It is now 2:15 a.m. as he then hears muffled scraping noises. She is tearing out the paper in a soup as then she spits in the soup. Must have worked at Waffle House. Ringing a bell, the offspring then come a-running in a straight line towards the house. As they all begin filtering in down the road, one by one, they file in as Pennywise watches. The next day, Youngling then shows up alone to school as the dad is cleaned up and brought in, claiming that he has suffered a stroke a while ago. As a result of the cops' involvement, the detectives had to go check out this area as the parents are then fed along with all the other offspring in the basement. This brings us to where we are now as the Youngling then comes home to find Officer Doofy in his house, as Grease Lightning also has been turned. Pennywise then tells Youngling that they are leaving tomorrow as she tells him not to step over the salt line. As night begins to fall, Sterling and Blonde Ramen then wait outside as the front door opens with Officer Doofy exiting the house. Seeing him, he then waves them in. Yeah, fat chance, brother. No shot I'm walking into that house. Having spotted this, Youngling then gets ready to rock and roll Brides of Christ as Blonde Ramen is waved over by Officer Doofy. Yes, once again, fat chance, as Sterling then goes to grab Blonde Ramen, telling her to wait as Grease Lightning then tackles Sterling. Going absolute alpha chat on him, it becomes a choose-your-own-adventure situation with the whole squad dealing with separate issues. Officer Doofy then attacks Blonde Ramen as she potato peels his face. Good God, ow. Sterling is having issues with Grease Lightning continue his attack because he just will not stay down as he keeps yeeting him, and then he gets tackled through the basement door. Meanwhile, Youngling's parents are absolutely lost in the sauce as he runs to Pennywise's room. Pulling the force multiplier from Officer Doofy, Blonde Ramen then takes him out, as then she domes Grease Lightning. Heading down into the basement, Sterling then looks for his son, as Blonde Ramen has a nice cry over Officer Doofy being donezo. Gonna be hard to explain that one, really, as Youngling is then pushed back to the Pennywise bathroom. So Sterling keeps looking as then he finds Pennywise. Oh, God! Being turned by Pennywise, Sterling then grabs Blonde Ramen as Youngling then snaps the twig, releasing all of the other Younglings. Pennywise begins running out, having the spell broken that she's had on everybody, and then running through others' houses. The offspring give chase as everyone watches what was going on. Getting pulled down in someone's front yard, the rest of the Younglings then begin attacking her as Blonde Ramen is dealing with a few problems as they start pulling her apart, as they open her head like a literal piñata. With the ringleader destroyed, Sterling is then released from his daze, along with Blonde Ramen. Blonde Ramen then goes to check on Youngling, finding him hugging his mute parents, as Sterling then finds Matthew in a crowd of offspring. Youngling's parents never really appear to recover as quickly as maybe the offspring do, but they are reunited with their parents, and evidently some of them have even started talking this year. And thus concludes Weapons. Hello and welcome to the science portion. Now obviously you're probably a lot like me, wondering, well, how can you rationalize this exactly using biology? Oh, you sweet, sweet summer child. With absolutely cracked out explanations, of course. As I always say with these things, the devil's in the details, specifically with most things. Just like that biologist who domed himself in World War Z, slipping on a few raindrops and leaving his safety off. I refuse to go out like that, by the way, but he is correct. Nature indeed does hide its flaws, so to speak, out in the open for one reason or another. That, or the reality is, we are the only species that can effectively clock that information. Probably why we are the first to come up with germ theory as far as we know. And with this infection, which I do believe it to actually be an infection, we can actually see the same thing. So specifically, what, if any, evidence is there to support this line of thinking? Let's set the timeline up real quick, which will actually show us everything that we need to know. Instead of jumping around, what we see is most likely everything within the span of probably just a few weeks, causing things to go absolutely haywire. Prior to Pennywise showing up, there were no problems whatsoever, and everyone was happy and content. This was an environment that was completely uncorrupted. Now that may sound like a no-duh moment, but it's important to establish that the immediate surroundings were untainted by what was to come. Now after Pennywise showed up, that's when things began to shift, and then eventually the offspring would be affected and then run from their homes. This indicates that Pennywise is in fact the vector for any infection that may be spreading. However, this infection is not so much bacterial or viral in nature, but a third type, which we will discuss here momentarily. It may seem all disconnected, but you can actually draw lines between interactions with others, whether it be to like location or being around people, that shows this isn't so much something supernatural, but requires an honest-to-God interaction with a specific point that proves it's an infection. So let's begin tracing these interactions real quick, as this will lend some credence to this line of thought and make me sound not completely cracked out. Pennywise showed up to the youngling's home first, a few days prior. Upon her showing up, let's assume the entire family is currently infected. We see the mother and father are, but it would not just be them. It would also be the youngling as well. We can assume that the environment is contaminated to boot. As the youngling goes to school, his classmates would also be exposed to the same infection that his parents have, they just possess a more dormant version. Blonde Ramen would also be infected by the same issue, given that she was in the classroom and actively broke the touch barrier by touching the youngling's shoulder, which sounds weird, but it's not as weird as it is. Anyways, later we can assume that the younglings of the class would go home, where they would also go on to infect their parents with the same infection that they had as well, which any of you that have kids out there, you already know that's a very real thing. And this is all part of a system that's all well and good, but there seems to be somewhat of an issue once you start moving outside of that range. Potentially with the third-hand exposure, which is what the principal experienced, it may cause problems essentially with like that far of a downstream issue. So with the offspring, it's Pennywise to younglings to Blonde Ramen. However, with the principal, it was Pennywise to younglings to Blonde Ramen to principal. This leap from Blonde Ramen to principal would almost be too far for an effective control to be established, at least as it seems. And this is only accomplished by the fact that Pennywise meets up with the principal directly later on. We can also see evidence that the environment itself is contaminated, which can further cause issues. While I believe Sterling was infected prior to the fight scene, if we look at Grease Lightning and Officer Doofy, while Officer Doofy was spared, given his interaction with Blonde Ramen would have actually put him at the same range away from Pennywise as the principal was, they both entered the home directly later on. And this was their exposure event that put them directly in line with how things would work with the principal. So it may be that the direct infection concerning Pennywise herself actually ends up causing the effects of mind control, but a tertiary or possibly even quaternary infection does not. Which you may be asking, why even think this is an infection in the first place? Well, as we look at the symptoms associated with a clear sign that something is wrong, we can also begin to draw conclusions surrounding one specific event, the pop-up of Pennywise in random areas. When Sterling was infected already, he could see Pennywise in his out-of-body experience when it came to the dream that he was having. When Blonde Ramen falls asleep, she saw a youngling wearing makeup and then saw Pennywise on the ceiling. This was also a big indicator. When Grease Lightning saw Pennywise out there in the forest after entering the home, this showed that he had become infected at that point as well. All of these sightings indicate that something specific is affecting the brain beyond the idea of maybe it just being supernatural. There does seem to be a delineating factor or a bleed over effect in the brain, I guess you could call it. When a person is like dreaming, for instance, they will see the person they are trying to focus on as wearing this makeup. So a combination of at least two people. When Sterling sees it, the Pennywise comes fully into focus. However, when awake, the woman herself is actively hallucinated about, so what is happening? Well, to me, given the dream state and waking state both being affected, this would actually be a network issue rather than just a standard Brodmann's areas affected. With complex visual hallucinations within the occipital lobe exist the visual processing areas of the brain. So with these complex visual hallucinations, an area known as Brodmann areas 19 is typically associated, and this will actively cause the person to see people's faces, or faces in general, and also just see people in their field of view that are not actually there. However, given that with others, the person they saw when dreaming, they're kind of searching for meaning, right? This means that the fusiform gyrus in the temporal lobe would likely blend the recognition of this original person with Pennywise. But what does that really mean? Well, this would be a massive indicator that the brain is actually being influenced rather than reality around it being altered. That would mean Pennywise is not just showing up in the woods or elsewhere, and she's also not just being dreamed about, meaning she's some dream-hopping demon. Instead, an infection has begun to spread, which is altering the neuronal behavior of key areas of the brain, specifically the occipital and temporal lobe areas, causing a person to see her. Now, what exactly are we dealing with here, since we have already established who the vectors are as well as some of the symptoms? Because we do need to still discuss how the actual infection process works here in a moment, and why your body may not really have a chance to deal with it properly. What I believe we are seeing is a form of cordyceps being used for what might be like an auditory form of mind control, but there also appears to be an active form of the infection and a much more dormant form that can be activated dependent upon the criteria being met. So you may be asking, well, why cordyceps to begin with? Well, in movies like this, there's always clues as to what's actually being conveyed. When the principal and his husband are eating lunch in the most uncomfortable looking living room I have ever seen, that layout is actually horrendous, and the chairs you sit on to watch TV, brother, where is the big L-shaped couch? Okay. Anyways, they are watching something specifically about cordyceps, and the reality is cordyceps, while not intrinsic to controlling humans, has some pretty profound and complex neurological interactions with insects that actually helps it spread. Does this seem like it's sort of spreading through humanity as well? Very interesting, right? So in ant colonies, cordyceps is quite insidious. As an ant becomes infected with what is known as Ophiocordyceps, the cordyceps will land as a spore-like state on the exoskeleton. As it settles in, it will begin to release enzymes that have the ability to melt through the cuticle of the ant's exoskeleton quite easily. Soon enough, the cordyceps will then enter the hemolymph, which is its bodily fluids. Essentially, it's a blood-like fluid that fuels the ant's body with nutrition and oxygen. And it's, of course, having an open circulatory system, meaning that the cordyceps will have access to everything that it needs. Over time, the cordyceps will naturally begin to grow, where the cells of this infectious creature will circulate everywhere within the body. They will actually attach to key points like muscles, and hyphae are then generated, which will interconnect to become something like a second nervous system, except this one is literally another organism. It should also be known, however, that the cordyceps does not just hijack the ant's body by attacking the brain, which will be important later. Instead, it is controlling the peripheral nervous system itself and also can release chemicals that will go on to interact with the brain. As a result of this arrangement, the body will now be behaviorally hijacked, not mind-controlled, although the brain is affected somewhat by the chemicals that cordyceps will release. In about 1 to 2 days, the ant will begin displaying some odd symptoms. It will become disoriented and then wander away from the colony. In some ant colonies, if ants actually begin sort of behaving this way, they will be thrown out of the colony by soldier ants and then blocked entry again to prevent the infection from spreading. At this point, the ant will have control of itself wrestled away as it begins showing abnormal climbing behavior. This is due to the fungal cells clustering around specifically motor neurons and muscle junctions. The ant is now forced into what is affectionately known as a death march, as it will climb into the surrounding vegetation where it will engage in a death grip and then bite the underside of a leaf or branch. As it does this, the mandibles are then locked in place as the muscles are shut down and the contractile compounds are released onto the mandibles to keep the jaw contracted. At this point, the host is completely paralyzed in place, meaning it's still conscious, but it has zero control over its own body. Once the ant dies, the fungus ingests the ant, as then the stalk grows from the head. A fruiting body now comes out, which contains more spores. As the spores are released into the environment, it will rain down on the colony below, very likely infecting any other ants that might be outside. This infection can actually lead to the complete annihilation of an ant colony if not addressed rapidly, or even having the colony moved if cordyceps isn't identified in time. So how does that track with what we have seen? Well, Pennywise is clearly the primary vector. For one reason or another, she at some point in time had come into contact with this form of cordyceps that jumped from insects to humans. In fact, it's never explicitly told to us what she has as far as an illness, it's just assumed to be cancer of sorts, but what I think we are seeing is someone in the advanced stages of this specific cordyceps infection. In fact, she has deluded herself into believing she can get all these younglings if she just infects them, and then somehow that's going to make her live. It's never really explained how that would make her live or what that even is about. That is literally the cordyceps dictating the fact that she's entering the late stages of her infection, so she wants to infect as many as possible, which follows what cordyceps wants exactly. So this would mean that her entire behavior here, it's not even predicated on a real desire to survive indefinitely that's alluded to, but actually completely at the behest of cordyceps that has infected her, which will then, we'll go kind of more into depth of that if we need to, but I feel like I've kind of explained that. But let's look at how this potential infection may be operating in the first place and what snapping the twig may be doing. So let's assume Pennywise is the typhoid Mary here who shows up with this infection existing within the house. She then seeds the entire area with spores, which were immediately breathed in by the parents of the youngling. Given that plant she has, we could even potentially make the logical leap that the idea that this fungus is also within the plant as well, which would make a fair amount of sense given what we are about to see. As she continues to live in the house, the spores would then enter through the mouth and nose of a non-infected person. As this happens, their lungs will be compromised, but also the olfactory bulb of the brain, as the entry point high in the nasal cavity does exist, and this allows for spores to enter two critical areas at once. The brain is important, but not as much as the peripheral nervous system in this instance. As the spores enter the alveolar sacs of the lung, typically macrophages will be patrolling the lungs as the first line of defense for this specific problem, because every breath you take, you're just breathing in tons of mold spores. However, it is known that cordyceps specifically contains bioactive compounds that can reduce inflammatory signals. As a result, even if some are found and destroyed, the call doesn't go out loud enough to put the body on high alert or to recruit many more macrophages, and so some of the spores would pass into the pulmonary vein. Once here, the cordyceps would continue to grow and spread much like in ants, creating hyphae in the body and diminishing any measurable immune response that could destroy it. It would then attach itself to the more vulnerable and open nerves of the body, the peripheral nervous system, and in these, the motor neurons are contained. As this infection continues to entrench itself further, we can assume that the spores that had moved to the olfactory bulb would also continue to spread into this brain area. However, their growth might look a little different. Spreading amongst the brain, the first clear indicator that they are beginning to affect the nervous tissue here is the visual hallucinations that would begin to pop up randomly. This shows us that they are now starting to release the chemicals in the brain that are beginning to influence behavior somewhat, although the infection has not been fully activated. To do this, another step is necessary in this process beyond just entering the body. This part gets a bit odd, I'll not lie to you, but what it appears like is there's an alpha strain, we'll call it, and a beta strain. This may be tertiary or quaternary strains of the infection that just may be too far out, like it changes too much over time. But if you are more closely linked to the alpha strain of the infection, it seems like taking the DNA from a host that is infected and linking it with the blood of the primary vector, in this case Pennywise, it appears to trip the infection into a more active and controllable situation. When we see the principal have his infection go active, the first thing his body does is go completely stiff. This is textbook hijacking of the peripheral nervous system, or when your girlfriend puts her icebox feet on your back in the middle of the night. The attack after, resulting in him puking, is due to the violent muscle contractions likely all over his body. The stomach also being contracted as well with such force that would likely tear, causing him to also throw up blood, which may appear black. What's horrific is, likely he's still in there mentally, as if we go back to Youngling's parents, they do ask him how his day was, although they appear in a more fog-like state. Almost like they're delirious. Almost like ants on their first or second day of infection. This means the brain is still operational, but it's being heavily influenced by the effects of cordyceps currently residing within it. So then, how does snapping a twig cause the infection to go active? This is relied on the brain itself. What I think is happening is when a person who's infected is near this tree, once the blood of the primary vector and DNA of the host is combined, this would prime the primary cordyceps to release a specific chemical signature. It would need to reside within the plant itself, and once the tree is snapped, a combination of auditory cues and this chemical signature are rapidly released into the surrounding environment. The brain detects a sound, which may fire a very specific pattern that alerts the cordyceps within the brain of what just happened, because remember, we have to assume at some point the cordyceps hasn't just invaded humans for the first time recently, but actually has finally tuned itself to be intrinsically familiar with the human neurological condition, I guess you could say, and our muscular systems in order to interact like it does. But how could we even replicate this in nature? Well, a twig snapping, it's in a tree. I mean, if we're to assume that this has co-evolved with humanity, this is something as simple as primates being near the tree and grabbing a tree branch and accidentally cracking it, which is going to release the cordyceps and chemical signatures. And if you have another primate that's nearby and already infected, it may be like when they cross the salt line, it just causes them to literally go ape mode. And then that creates another, I guess, amount of nutrition that could be nearby. So, because basically they're killed. But as the chemical signature arrives through the nose next to the auditory, or next after at least the auditory cue, the intent of the primary vector can be implied. And this is why the principal attacks his husband and not the other way around, as the infection in the husband isn't as deeply ingrained. When the new DNA of blonde ramen is then added next, this would update the genetic profile of what to seek out, as then, very likely using cues from the environment, such as scent trails or possibly even other cordyceps in the environment, the principal is able to basically move as a heat-seeking missile. Now, is this ability fully understood? Look, I don't want to sugarcoat it. The answer is no, because given the distance, it's unlikely, without a lot of help, that he could find this. So this would mean most of this area would actually have to be seeded with this infection and be communicating underfoot. However, it's not entirely impossible given that there is quite literally a species in Blue Mountains, Oregon that inhabits, was it like 2,385 acres, which is around like 3.7 square miles of space. Malaria Osteae, probably Osteae, I think, is interconnected amongst one another and actively is communicating right now. If this same idea is applied, this may be how the principle is updated on concerning Blonde Ramen's location through underground growths, showing him where she is at any point in time. It then becomes about just getting there, which Naruto running is the preferred method. And finally, why then does she get got at the end? Well, really, it appears to me the blood of a host, intent on what they want, the DNA from another strand, is really all you need to take control of the infection. Either way, the fungus is not too concerned because even if it's a dormant form of infection or active, the fungus will still be able to use the host for nutrition and spreading. I mean, again, much like how an ant will do weird things at the end before spreading the spores amongst other ants, this is literally what Pennywise is doing. She's at her end. So she's like, oh, well, in order to survive indefinitely, I need all of these younglings. To do what? What are you gonna steal their thetans or something? There's nothing that you can take. So really all this is cordyceps continuing to want to be spread from this host, and that is driving her to do these things. So by the younglings using intent and given the other offspring were all infected as well, it seems as though he is able to control multiple bodies to tear apart Pennywise. It's just the same process she's been doing all along, just used against her, really. Ultimately, I believe this to be a form of cordyceps that somehow is completely adapted to man's physiology, we just hadn't discovered it. This would seem to indicate that there maybe was a co-evolution event quite some time ago. Pennywise at some point ran into this infection, and her current state is, if it's anything to go off of, it seems like then that even the dormant variant at some point will deplete the human meat suit, or she could literally just have another issue going on, such as cancer, because let's be real here, if cordyceps is sort of calming down the immune system, cancer could definitely rise as a result of that. But it does appear, however, that there are lingering consequences. As the infection shows up and is activated, this will actually disrupt neurological functioning in the brain. As this takes place, even after it's possible, like you've been downshifted so much, even in the more dormant state, like regardless of if you're receiving, I guess what could be considered communications from the more alpha strand, the firing patterns of the brain do not immediately reestablish, and the older you are, the longer it may take to return to normal. The younglings, actually, when you're that age, you have more neuroplasticity, which is your brain's ability to like recover from damage quicker, and as you get older, that goes away. So some of the younglings began talking like a year later. However, the younglings' parents, why did I say it like that, infected first, show the lingering consequences to adults may be more profound and even permanent as their brain chemistry is permanently altered by the cordyceps infection. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then please leave a like as I'll get the video out there, and subscribing helps us to continue on to 1.3 million subs. Hey, that's good. I don't know, that might take a minute. Anyways, I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Runo Tales channel links, and other stuff in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the astronaut tier, we have It's Not a Spoon, Kusith, and Lipsy Gingy. Thank you, Brooklahomas, for your awesome support. At the astrophysicist tier, we have Death Dancer, Myura, and Webtron Supreme. Thank you guys as well. And at the scientist tier, we have Stutz, Frank Shaft Crank, Some Big Nerd, Metric System, Victus Echo, Official Texan, and the homeless guy on the street. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I really do appreciate y'all's support. It goes a long way towards helping out, so thank you. All right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed. We'll see y'all in the next one.